I'll call this meeting to order. I'd like to thank the Minister for coming today to meet with our Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans, and certainly I know I don't have to go through all the procedures with you, Minister. You've been here several times in the past, and anyhow, you'll probably hear that famous beeping noise from up front here when the time expires for members, and please, if you could begin to bring your comments, your remarks to a conclusion at that point in time. Begin with, Minister, I'd ask that maybe you introduce the guests that you have with you here this morning, the people appearing with you, and if you have an opening statement, you could proceed right into that at this point in time, Minister. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everyone. And I just want to pass my appreciation on to the committee for all the work they do in the name of Fisheries. With me this morning I have Claire Dansereau to my immediate right, who is the Deputy Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, and to my left I have David Bevan, who's the Associate Deputy Minister, and to Ms. Dansereau's right is Kevin Stringer, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister of Programs. So I'll get right into my opening comments. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today and say a few words about my department's aquaculture initiatives. I know that several of you have recently returned from a tour of aquaculture facilities in Western Canada and the U.S., so I don't need to tell you how important the industry is becoming. Already, aquaculture production accounts for at least 6,000 full-time direct jobs in Canada and close to 10,000 spin-off or support jobs. It provides more than $1 billion annually to our GDP and accounts for almost 30% of our country's total yearly seafood production and fish landings. Aquaculture operations now exist in every province in Canada and in the Yukon and produce an annual harvest of almost 145,000 tons per year. In some of our coastal communities, I can frankly say that aquaculture has rescued local economies and given them new opportunities. Take the town of Bellaram in the south coast of Newfoundland as an example. Bellaram and its fishing industry date back to the late 18th century, but the town had fallen on hard times in recent years. Unemployment was soaring, social problems were on the rise, and it looked as if the town was in danger of disappearing. Now, thanks to a hugely successful aquaculture project, there's close to full employment again in that town. Businesses have reopened and the community is thriving. On the west coast, there's a striking success story involving the First Nations community of Ahousaht on Vancouver Island, where aquaculture has also provided a dramatic boost to what had been a struggling economy. These two examples point out one of the main strengths of the aquaculture industry. Developments occur primarily in coastal and rural communities where other economic opportunities can be transient. Many of the jobs created by aquaculture are full-time and permanent. They can give back a community back its strength while at the same time showing respect for the environment. Even in the uncertain financial times we have endured over the past few years, the aquaculture industry continues to offer exciting new opportunities for Canadians, providing permanent jobs, economic growth, and stability. Maintaining this momentum depends on two key ingredients: partnership and market access. It is our job as the Government of Canada to create the conditions for industry to succeed and thrive, but it is the industry itself that has to seize upon this opportunity. In today's economic climate, strong partnerships among governments and stakeholders are needed more than ever, especially when we consider the shared responsibilities of aquaculture management. The Government of Canada is committed to working with the provinces and territories, First Nations, industry, the science and conservation communities to build a sustainable and prosperous industry for the future. We saw a perfect example of this kind of partnership last month at the meeting in St. John's of the Canadian Council of Fisheries and Aquaculture Ministers. The Council gave its formal approval to the National Aquaculture Strategic Action Plan Initiative, or NASAPI as we call it. As a result, for the first time ever, we have seen an agreement in place that has been endorsed by the federal government, provinces, territories, and industry. That level of consensus does not happen easily or often. NASAPI was launched to develop targeted action plans to encourage sustainable aquaculture development in all regions of the country. Each action plan will set precise and realistic objectives to be achieved within a 5-year time frame. As Minister, I understand the importance of innovation in aquaculture. Developing new practices and technologies reduces costs, improves protection of the environment, and generates greater market value for products. NASAPI will help achieve these goals, and we will measure and report on our progress regularly. We will also update and renew these plans to ensure that they remain responsive to the needs of Canadians and the aquaculture industry. Over the past 2 years, Fisheries and Oceans Canada has also been actively involved in examining closed containment technologies that might be applied to the salmon aquaculture industry. My department is contributing financial support toward the further development of closed containment technologies and has recently completed a financial feasibility study of various systems. The study concluded that certain closed containment technologies are technically feasible but are currently challenging from a financial perspective. The results of the study are available on my department's website. Work is continuing on that file. Another example of our commitment to aquaculture can be found in our response to last year's decision by the British Columbia Supreme Court. In February of 2009, the court ruled that aquaculture is a fishery and therefore falls within the jurisdiction of the federal government. Given that decision, and with the cooperation of the province of British Columbia, we moved quickly to ensure that the industry had the structure that it needs in place to allow it to continue to grow and prosper. We saw the opportunity to take action and move forward with a new federal management regime. As a result, before December the 18th this year, we'll be ready to officially implement new regulations under the Federal Fisheries Act for aquaculture in BC. In fact, I expect to visit British Columbia within the coming weeks to sign a memorandum of understanding with the province. That, I think, committee members will agree, is an incredible accomplishment. We have gone from a standing start to a full implementation of a completely new program in just over 20 months. We want the aquaculture industry to succeed over the long term, and we want it to maintain its distinguished international reputation. I can also point with pride to 2 DFO programs aimed at fostering innovation and market access by companies involved in aquaculture. The Program for Aquaculture Innovation and Market Access, which we call AMAP, and the Aquaculture Collaborative Research and Development Program. In the first 2 years of AMAP, we have funded 60 projects with a DFO contribution of $8 million. For example, we provided $1.2 million to Kanakwa Seafoods Limited of Advocate Harbour, Nova Scotia, towards its work in tank farming Atlantic halibut. In Western Canada, we invested more than $630,000 in 6 aquaculture projects in British Columbia to help companies develop and adapt technologies that will benefit our fishery. Our direct spending on our AMAP leveraged an additional $22 million of investment from other partners. We are currently in the process of announcing the projects approved in year 3 of the program. In the first 3 years, ACRDP funded 154 projects valued at $14 million. The result is better fish protection, optimal fish health, and protection of the environment. I know there are Canadians who have raised concerns about the growth of aquaculture in Canada and its potential impact on the environment and on wild species. Let me assure committee members that my department takes these concerns very seriously. That's why our scientists continue to play an integral role in the risk assessment process, both through our own research and through rigorous reviews of work done outside the department. In fact, DFO has conducted shellfish aquaculture research since the 1960s and salmon and trout aquaculture research since the 1970s. This research provides us with confidence that the environmental effects of aquaculture are well understood and properly managed. In addition, the vast majority of cases, proposed aquaculture operations undergo a thorough environmental assessment before facilities can be approved. These measures might include choosing appropriate locations for sites to avoid important or sensitive habitats, incorporating periods of inactivity into site production schedules, or adjusting production levels based on environmental monitoring performance. Fisheries and Oceans Canada and other federal and provincial territorial government departments also monitor aquaculture operations to ensure they continue to meet regulations. I'm confident that committee members share a desire for the nation's aquaculture sector to be self-sufficient, competitive, and prosperous. We have established a solid basis for the future, and I look forward to helping chart the future for this dynamic industry. Its future can be virtually limitless. Currently, our aquaculture industry ranks 16th in the world in terms of production. There's no reason why we can't exceed many of our competitors. We have a tremendous opportunity to build an industry that will survive and thrive for decades to come, and to do so in a way that's environmentally sustainable. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will be pleased to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. Murray.
Thank you, Madam Minister, for being here at our committee and for taking the time to update us on the aquaculture work. I have a couple of sets of questions, but I'd just like to start with a concern from my province of British Columbia. And we know that the decision to stop the Taseko Prosperity Mine involved a number of cabinet ministers, including this minister. And we also know that the cabinet decision to block the Taseko Mine's prosperity project required 4 ministers to sign off on it for it to be considered a cabinet decision. The minister is aware from other conversations that there's strong indications from highly abnormal share trading and plunging prices associated at the time the cabinet was making its decision that there may have been a cabinet leak. So I have a few questions about that. Minister, what date did you sign off on the Taseko mine decision? Who in your office knew about this decision? Has your office handed over any and all information about the deal to the RCMP and the PCO? And there was another project that was approved, the Mount Milligan project, that also affected inland fisheries. And are you confident that there was no leak involving this project?
Well, Honourable Member, I thought we were here to talk about aquaculture this morning, but what I can tell you is that the government rejected this project based on the environmental assessment, because the environmental assessment showed that the project would do irreparable harm to the environment. I can't speak about cabinet operations because cabinet, that is confidential information.
Well, can you get back to this committee? My understanding was this was a broader discussion about fisheries concerns, not solely focused on aquaculture. So I understand if you don't have these answers at your fingertips, but we would appreciate information around who knew about the decision and whether.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Cannon, state your point
Thank
of
you,
order.
Mr. My honourable colleague across the way was a provincial cabinet minister and understands when you sign an oath to public duty, there's a confidentiality requirement. So she's stepping outside the boundaries. The minister said she can't divulge the information of cabinet discussions. So there's no way that she can provide this information unless you're going to ask her to, perjury. Thank you, Mr.
That's not
Chair.
a point of order, and I hope that the chair
Ms. Murray, I'll decide if it's a point of order. Thank you.
I can make whatever requests I want.
Absolutely.
Thank you. On the point of order, Mr. Cannon, it's not a point of order, first off. And secondly, the minister can provide any information that she wants to, or she feels she can provide outside of the cabinet confidentiality. And I know the minister is aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, yes, having been a cabinet minister, I'm aware that the content of a cabinet decision will be confidential, but is the minister suggesting that the date of cabinet decisions is confidential? That's not my understanding, so I'm asking who knew about the decision and when the decision was signed off by the minister's office and whether information has been handed over to the RCMP. So if those facts aren't available to the minister, I would welcome the answer in written form at a time that's minister is able to access that information. So I do have other. So will that be forthcoming?
No, it won't. My response to your question will be what it was. I can't speak about cabinet confidentiality. Cabinet operations are confidential. We made a decision based on the environmental assessment that it would cause irreparable harm to the environment, and those are my comments on that.
Thank you. Well, I know the minister doesn't intend to hide behind cabinet confidentiality, and I will encourage the minister to check that information and provide it. I have a concern about the some information in the 2009-10 estimates. It's a very general question. I appreciate the focus on the aquaculture development and the futures limitless and the so on. I understand the importance of aquaculture to jobs. Of course, it's also a great concern that there may be interactions between aquaculture and the wild salmon in British Columbia, where many of the stocks have been declining over the years. Minister, we're all aware of the importance of habitat management, management of the ocean, protected areas, and science for having a healthy foundation so that we can have industrial fisheries and we can have aquaculture sustainably. So I note that the budget has had huge reductions in the budget for the budget areas around ocean management, healthy and productive aquatic ecosystems, and I'm wondering if the minister can explain why there's almost a 50% reduction in spending between 08-09 and 09-10 in the area of healthy and productive aquaculture ecosystems. Are the ecosystems and their sustainability not a priority for this minister? I might not get to this first question.
Honourable Member, of course we understand the importance of healthy oceans, and that's why we have 5 large ocean management areas that are at various stages of development. We have developed about 15 marine protected areas, and the funding for those could be in various places in the budget. So I can't speak specifically to the line that you're speaking to, but we have created those marine protected areas, and we've undergone extensive consultation. And as you know, right now there's consultations happening on a new large ocean management area off the coast of British Columbia, because we do take the health of the oceans very seriously.
So there's no specific rationale for decreasing spending on oceans management, habitat management, and science from $231 million down to $140 million. How many jobs were lost by that program, well, the major decimation of the program for healthy and productive ecosystems?
I'm going to ask the Deputy to respond to that specifically.
Thank you, Minister. There have been no jobs lost as a result of the recoding and how we indicate how we spend the money. So it's not a question of reduction in work. It's not a question of reduction in priority. It's more a matter of how the money is distributed across the priorities within a coding system. So there will be concurrent increases in other areas that show that the money has been transferred from one to the other, primarily to the Coast Guard. We changed the way we coded our monies. The Coast Guard receives money on a regular basis. We pay them to help us in the science. They are the platform from which we do the science. So a decision was made to allocate monies to them at the start of the year, and rather than code it to science, we code it to Coast Guard. We would be happy, though, to come back to talk about our SUPs and to talk about the budget process.
Thank you. And I'm particularly concerned about the cuts to science, because that's also been experienced by scientists that have spoken to me from British Columbia, and that's one of the key things that constituents and people concerned about the fisheries in British Columbia are asking for, and that's a restoration of funding for science. We know that there's an inadequacy in the science, both for issues like sea lice on impacts on wild salmon, but also in terms of the salmon more broadly. The scientists will say there's a black box in terms of what's going on with the fish. So that's a huge concern to me to see that science budget cut here in this estimates. Lastly, I do have some questions about, we've been dealing with the snow crab decision to reduce snow crab allowable catch, and could the minister took a decision in 2009 which had a major risk of steepening the decline in the biomass of snow crab. And could the minister tell the committee what advice did she take that led to the maintaining of the allowable catch, although the scientists warned that there was almost a 50% chance of a significant steepening in the biomass decline, which did in fact come out. So who influenced the minister's decision on this matter in that she decided against the scientific advice?
Well, thank you. And honourable member, first of all, let me say I want to clarify something, and I guess, just from the deputy's comments, she said there have been no cuts to science. I want to make sure that that's on the record. As a matter of fact, we've increased our science because we do more partnering with universities. We have MOUs with other countries where we cooperate on science, so we maximize the return for our science investment. What the deputy did say is that some of those funds have been, as opposed to the funds being on a DFO science line, those funds are now on the Coast Guard line in the budget because they actually provide the platform for us to do science. So there have been no cuts in science. I just want to make that clear. But we are doing a lot of things cooperatively with other organizations, which allows us to have more science done for the investment. With respect to snow crab, back in 2009, I did not exceed the science advice in the decision on the snow crab tack. As you're aware, there's an advisory process which the industry is very much involved in when the science is done on snow crab, and the department provides myself for final decision with a range of TAC that could be approved with a number of decisions, and they make a recommendation. Now, while I did not take the recommendation, I met several times with the industry and who did not agree with our science, and so they were looking for status quo for a rollover of the TAC from the previous year. They were well aware of the risks involved in this, and as a matter of fact, if you'd like, I could produce the notice to fishers that went out that actually spelled out the risk by rolling over the TAC. So they were well aware. I consulted with our science folks who assured me that by rolling over the TAC it would not do irreparable harm to the stock. It was a one-year rollover only because TACs are set on an annual basis. So as a result of that, the TAC did take a big drop the next year, but I don't think it was any surprise to the fishers.
Thank you, Minister. And if you would like to provide that document to the committee, to the clerk, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Monsieur Blais.
Mr. Blais. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome. Minister, I've already stated publicly, and I'll repeat it again today, that I think that you have made the right decisions with respect to seals, that you have made the right decisions over the past few months. However, but with respect to another file, the seal, gray seal, this is another issue. Now, I don't know how many times I've had an opportunity to speak to you. Am I disrupting another meeting, or? I've had an opportunity to speak with you about the gray seal at several opportunities, and you have made commitments, and Loyal Hearn has made certain commitments. However, today, in December 2010, soon to be 2011, nothing has been announced. The only decision that was announced was in June 2009, when you said that you told the department to ensure that there would be a selective harvest. So we're talking about June 2009, and you added that in acting now I'm talking about June 2009 when you made that announcement. Now it's December 2010, soon 2011, and nothing has been announced with respect to the gray seal. And you know perfectly well that it continues to eat up our resources, all kinds of resources. And so I'm not talking just about whatever's left of the cod, but I'm talking about crab and lobster. And we've heard very clear testimony. Now, I don't want to accuse you of bad management, but today I'm going to have to do that. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about that file.
And I know this is something that you're very concerned about, and something I'm very concerned about too. With the explosion in the numbers of gray seals, I am well aware that it's an issue that has to be addressed. We have done a lot of work on the seal file. And of course, what we do has to be supported by science. So there was a lot of work done on the science on the gray seal file, particularly in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and we're now, can say with certainty that the seal population is affecting the rebuilding of the cod. With respect to other species, the effect it's having on lobster and crab, we can't say that with certainty yet, but the science is ongoing. We did some work on coming up with an acceptable method to decrease the number of seals in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, but I have to say thank you for your patience because it's something that we're still working on. We've put a lot of effort into trying to open new markets, trying to develop new products, and I know, that you're thinking that gray seals don't provide a lot of usable products, but we would like to get to a place where we can have full utilization of the animal, and work is ongoing in that field. Work is also ongoing on opening markets for those potential products and for those products that are also available now. So we expect to hear from the Chinese very soon on this. The Chinese have come to Canada and they've inspected our plants, and they're equivalent of our CFIA. And so we're expecting to hear back from the Chinese very soon. But I do understand that this is a big issue, and it's an issue of biodiversity. It's upsetting our whole ecosystem, and so I am confident that we will have something in place. I'm hoping to have something in place for the next season.
Malheureusement, Madame la Ministre, je dois vous...
Minister, unfortunately, I'm going to have to say that quite realistically speaking here, patience now has turned into impatience, I'm afraid, and it's just as simple as that. People are impatient. I am impatient. And there is a species benefiting from all this right now, and that's the gray seal. And if there is no strong decision made, no rigorous decision made, then we'll suffer, and the snow crab will suffer. And this is a question of environmental management. And to carry on the way you are doing, the way the minister is doing, it's going to be very easy to start accusing you of bad management, because this makes no sense. Today we're still waiting, and you're asking us once again to be patient. Furthermore, with respect to the harbors, to small ports, small harbors, in the 2010-2011 budget that ends on the 31st of March, there will no longer be that $200 million over 2 years. And so, unfortunately, we're sort of starting over again. That is to say, we'll be back at where we were 2 years ago. Now, according to the numbers, even with that effort, perhaps we've actually met a third of the needs. So 2/3 of those needs have not been met. What do you expect to do? Have you put any request forward to Cabinet so that there's a budget for these ports in Quebec and Canada in order to make these harbors safe and in order for you to be able to take on your responsibilities?
And you're quite right. We doubled our investment in small craft harbors over the last 2 years, which allowed us to address a lot of the harbors that had health and safety concerns. Those that were the most in need. And we do understand there's still a number of harbors out there, that need to have work done to them to ensure that they're safe for our fishers. But this has been probably the biggest investment in small craft harbors in history. And, I'm just glad that we got the budget passed so we could do that work on small craft harbors. It's always, of course, a budget item, budget consideration, small craft harbors. It's a line item in our budget. We'd always like to have more money, but we have made considerable progress with the harbors around the country for our fishing industry.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Minister, thank you for appearing before us today to provide some answers to our questions on the Fisheries and Oceans file. Minister, you mentioned in your opening remarks, you talked about the potential impact on the environment and on wild species in terms of aquaculture. And you also mentioned that you see no reason why Canada can't exceed many of the global competitors. And on those 2 points, I'd just like to add that I think that there has been proof of impact on both coasts from aquaculture on the ocean ecosystem and specifically on wild salmon. Certainly on the west coast, which I'm most familiar with, this has been shown in scientific research that there's been impacts from sea lice from farms on wild salmon. And while the farms do provide jobs on both coasts, there's also a real danger of losing jobs in other industries from this impact. And I'm glad to hear that the department's looked at moving to closed containment. But I'm just wondering if you can comment about when you could see the industry moving to closed containment.
Well, and as I said in my remarks, that closed containment, our research has shown that closed containment can work on a small scale, but it's not viable for large-scale operations. Just to go back to your, and if I might, to go back to your comments about the impacts, of sea lice on the wild fishery. And, you know, I've heard it over and over and over again that that was the case, and that was the cause of the demise of the Fraser River sockeye. But this year we have record runs in the Fraser River, so I guess, you know, that kind of begs even more questions about the impacts, because obviously sea lice on farm salmon was not a factor this year, if that was the case. So I think there's a lot more science to be done. You asked about, you know, how you figure that we could expand in Canada. Well, talking about expansion, we have a lot of more species that are farmed besides just finfish. We have a lot of different species that are farmed. So there are a lot of opportunities in a lot of different areas. But I think what we have to get to is sustainable development and ensure it's sustainable.
Thank you, Minister. Just a follow-up comment that I've talked to many of the farmers, including some of the biggest aquaculture farms on the West Coast, and they're very concerned about expanding. They haven't been able to expand in 7 years, no new licenses, and the impact on their industry has been the real or perceived problem with sea lice, or what the public views as environmental concerns. So I think that's one of the things that really does limit this industry in Canada, and I think if it's looking at things like closed containment, we could, I think that could provide a win-win situation for the environment, for the public, for the industry, and for the government. I just wanted to move on to the Fisheries Act, and there's been talk of a new Fisheries Act being introduced this year. I'm wondering if you could give us a comment on the Fisheries Act, if it is in fact coming, a new act is coming this year, and if so, are you able to provide a list of all those that you've consulted regarding this new act?
Well, we do intend to reintroduce legislation. As you know, we've already had a couple of runs at it, and I would hope that the folks around this table would really work for the industry, not play political games, because I think this is too important. We have to, you know, to hear from, there's already been extensive consultations done the last 2 times around, so we do have a lot of information. But I do intend to bring the act forward, and I just hope that everyone will take it seriously, because this is a lot of time and effort on everybody's part, and it only affects our industry, our economy. So I hope we'd have your support on that.
Because I have limited time, I'm just going to have to go right to my last question, I'm sure, before I hear that beep. And that is on lighthouses. And I just want to ask the Minister, before your government, the Conservatives, took power, you committed to maintaining staffed lighthouses. And I'm wondering if that commitment still exists today.
Well, what we have said, of course, you know, we're in tough economic times, and that's no secret. We have asked the Senate Committee on Fisheries to, I guess, go out and talk to folks in the regions, to talk to people who either, you know, work at lighthouses or might use this service, because DFO's responsibility is to ensure that we have a working light for mariners. So when we talked about destaffing lighthouses, you know, there was I guess a public outcry that this was going to jeopardize marine safety. Well, before we make any decisions, I want to ensure that we're not jeopardizing marine safety in any way. And
finally, if I'm going to hear that beep any time, but according to a recent audit, if an oil spill happened in Canadian waters today, the Coast Guard would not be able to contain or clean that up. This audit revealed that there was a lack of training and outdated equipment and a lack of proper management systems. I'm just wondering if the government is prepared to commit the necessary resources for the Coast Guard to protect our oceans and coastline from a catastrophic oil spill?
Well, one of the things I can tell you that we have done already is that, we've invested heavily in our fleet, so in the renewal fleet, which is very important. But I do want to say as well that when it comes to oil spill, and I don't know if members are aware of this, but if it's an offshore oil spill, when a company drills oil for oil offshore, they are required to have their oil spill response plan, and they're required to have the capacity to carry that out. If a tanker is in Canadian waters, they are responsible to have their oil spill response plan, and they're required to have the capacity to carry that out. The Coast Guard works as a monitor in these situations, but the Coast Guard also must have its own oil spill response capacity, because the Coast Guard is responsible for any spill that might happen where we can't find where the origin of the spill came from and things of that nature. So the audit did reveal that we have some work to do as far as developing a national program for oil spill response, because really what happens now, it's more regional. So a lot of the recommendations are administrative within the department. The Coast Guard has not fallen down on responding to oil spills. Any spills that's happened on an annual basis, they respond to about 1,300, and they do it quite successfully.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Camp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister and officials for being here, and Minister, for your willingness to take questions on a variety of topics in addition to aquaculture. So let me start with one that's more an East Coast issue, and then transition into some West Coast questions. In recent years, I guess, but certainly in recent months, tuna has been kind of a focus of attention in the fisheries world, at least Atlantic bluefin tuna, and I know Canada's involved in that fishery. Last year, I understand that at CITES it was a focus of their attention, and there was an attempt made to list a bluefin tuna, and Canada didn't support that initiative, as I understand it. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us Canada's position with respect to CITES, but then more recently, ICAT, the International Commission for Atlantic Tunas, had its meetings and just finished not many days ago. And just wonder if you could update us on what the developments were at that meeting and Canada's position in terms of whether we were disappointed with the results, or and if you could just tell us how the industry is doing as well in Canada.
Well, thank you for those questions. First of all, let me go back to the CITES recommendation that bluefin tuna be listed as an endangered species. What would have happened if bluefin tuna had been listed on CITES would be that this would put in place a trade ban among countries in bluefin tuna. It would not stop domestic fishing. So any country that consumes all of its tuna would have had no restriction on bluefin tuna fishery. So this means that the countries that are the violators, who are currently involved in overfishing bluefin tuna, would have kept right on fishing bluefin tuna, and Canada would have been penalized because we export all of our tunas. So that would have been done nothing to solve the problem. So what we said is we want to manage bluefin tuna through a regional fisheries management organization, which is ICAT. And so this year we went to ICAT. We have taken, Canada has taken a decrease in their total allowable catch for the last 3 years because we're good, responsible managers of this fishery. And in this year, we've seen, some success in the rebuilding of the stock. So science is showing us, that the stock is rebuilding. So we want to be cautious, and we want to ensure that we allow it to rebuild. So the results of this year's meetings resulted in a small reduction of the Canadian total allowable catch of about 11 tons, which is very small. So we certainly can live with that. In Canada, we have the best bluefin managed fishery in the world. We fish with a hook and line. Every tuna is tagged and accounted for. So we're doing our part to rebuild this stock. We have, of course, through ICAT, we must ensure that the rest of the world does its part as well. We were disappointed that some of our management measures that we put forward for stronger reporting did not get adopted, but we're going to continue to work on that.
So there's two species, though, or two populations, or I'm not sure what the right technical word is there, both Western and Eastern. So Western tuna, I guess, is what Canada, Western Atlantic, is what Canada primarily fishes, and there's also that Eastern. Do we have any concerns about the spill in the Gulf of Mexico on the future of Western Atlantic tuna?
Well, we have some concerns, but we won't see the results of that for a number of years, and just the preliminary information we have, we don't think, that the tuna population will be affected. The Gulf of Mexico is a spawning ground for tuna, so it will be a number of years before we see what the result of that will be.
Okay, thank you. Let me just kind of return to the subject matter of your comments, aquaculture in BC. I guess we understand that the courts made a decision that gave us responsibility for the management of aquaculture, which had previously been the provinces. So is the department sort of enthusiastically accepting this responsibility? And how do you see? Is it going to be kind of business as usual as it transfers from BC to the federal government, or will it be managed in a different way?
Well, this was the decision of the courts, so we'll comply with the decision of the courts. It's been a challenge for our staff over the last 20 months because, as I said in my opening remarks, we went from standing still to developing a whole new program, and by December the 18th, it has to come into place. So, some of the biggest differences that we see is that our regulations will streamline the industry more when it comes to service to clients. So before there had to be, the clients would have to go to the federal government for some approvals, for some licenses, and they had to go to the provincial government for others, such as they would have to come to the federal government for a predator license to take care of predators. So we'll streamline all that into one. We will have, our regulations require more public reporting, which is going to be more work for the industry, but it will be more transparent to everyone. And we will have stronger enforcement and better compliance. So we'll put more resources into the inspecting of fish farms and things of that nature to ensure that they're compliant with the regulations. I'm just going to ask Kevin Stringer if he might just elaborate on the reporting requirements, public reporting requirements.
Sure. As the Minister says, that we're ready, and that we take responsibility for the licensing and for the federal regime on December 18th. We will have a regulation in place. We will have licenses provided, and the license conditions, which have been circulated broadly to industry, but also to other interested parties, speak to the reporting requirements. They speak to what will probably be a major difference in the new regime, as the Minister said, which is there's enhanced reporting requirements on industry. And some of the things that were done by policy previously will now be done by condition of license. So we'll have regular reporting on fish health, including sea lice, but other diseases, on escapes, on environmental conditions. Each of the facilities will be required to have a fish health plan, an environmental management plan, and they'll be required to report regularly to DFO on those things. There are a few pieces that are proprietary information, and we've sorted out with industry what needs to be proprietary, but there will be significantly enhanced reporting on those things, and they'll be on DFO's website on a regular basis on those issues. As the Minister says, that's a fundamental difference in terms of what the system will look like going forward.
Good. Thank you. And just one final topic that's important to those of us on the West Coast. Prior to, for a number of years, there's been an allocation arrangement for halibut between the recreational sector and the commercial sector, the famous 88-12, as we refer to it, 88% going to the commercial sector, 12% to the recreational sector. And that was a decision that preceded you and your government. But that worked for a while, but my understanding that there's now pressure on that, that 12% has been, no longer adequate for the recreational sector in recent years. So I'm just wondering what you're doing to somehow resolve this issue.
Respond. Thank you. This has been a challenging issue for us, and we've put a lot of effort into trying to find a solution to the 88-12. And I just want to say, because there are a couple of factors here, and one of the factors is that there's no limit to the recreation sector, or how many people buy a license, how many people go fishing. So you never know how many fish need to be there to satisfy the recreational sector. The other thing is that there's no guarantee in the total amount, total allowable catch of halibut in any given year. So the 12% therefore translates into a different amount of fish every year. So it's been very challenging, but I'm going to ask the Deputy to respond to this, because she's been working on this file with the stakeholders in British Columbia.
Thanks, Minister. It is true that it's a very interesting and tricky question for us to address, because the needs on both sides of the equation are real, and as of course the needs for the fish are real. So we have put in place a small working group made up of, with a facilitator made up of the recreational fishers and the commercial side, to work through what we have instructed is that there are no limits to the things that they can consider in terms of sharing the allocation, and that we will do the policy analysis behind what is suggested. So that work is ongoing. It's not going as quickly as we might like. The questions are difficult. Sometimes we have to step aside because the fishing season is very active and people are on the water. But there was a meeting very recently, and there's another one coming up between the two groups to see if we can reach some kind of consensus for a recommendation to the Minister.
Thank you. We'll now move to a 2-minute round. Mr. Andrews.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. During our study on the snow crab, when we were in Cape Breton, we heard testimony about Area 23 and 24 crab management plan. I'm going to ask a couple questions regarding that today. We heard that once the TAC, the TAC, went to 9,700 tons, that there would be a 50-50 sharing arrangement. On a tip of request, we saw that advice from the department advised that it's recommended that previous ministerial decisions on access be maintained. And why was it that the previous ministerial decisions on the TAC, when it's hit 9,700 tons, that the 50-50 sharing arrangement did not come into play? Why did your department change its mind on that, Minister?
Well, thank you, Honourable Member. I think there are different interpretations of the report, and I do believe that the process was fair. I think it distributes quota equally among all licenses. One of the things that we have to do is manage that fishery sustainably. I know that back a number of years ago, a lot of new access was given to the fishery. If you look at overall, probably in your province as well as my province, there's overcapacity everywhere in the fishery. And that's something that is very difficult to manage, because in times of low TAC, nobody has a viable enterprise. And so then you have everybody wanting rationalization because there's not enough fish to go around. But that being said, with this decision, we made the decision. There's stability for everyone because everyone knows this is what it is going forward. So we felt that it was equitably done.
Time's expired, Mr. Andrews.
Thank you.
Unfortunately. Monsieur Levesque?
2 minutes, Madame la Ministre.
I have 2 minutes, Minister, not very long. As you know, last year, I believe this regards you, there was an agreement with the Crees on offshore rights in the Hudson Bay and James Bay areas. So there was a referendum that was held. It passed. Now we're waiting for the legislation from the federal government and from the Cree in the Bay James area. I don't know when that will be forthcoming. Now, given the small amount of time I have, I'd like to quickly come back to what my colleague stated, Finn, on the Act. Minister, I would remind you that in the speech from the throne that the government stated that it would bring forth legislation to bring up the Fisheries Act, bring it up to date. We have encouraged the government to move forward on this. Maybe that's the only area in which we've encouraged the government, but in any case, we've encouraged the government, and I want to know whether there will be a bill by the end of the session, the current session.
There will be a bill. I don't have a definite date on that right now, but there will be a bill, and I look forward to your support on that. Thank you very much. And on your other question about the offshore rights with the Cree, I do believe that might be an Indian and Northern Affairs issue, but we will check into that.
Then just to wrap up, I'm sure I don't have much time left. It's not only on committees that there's a lack of fairness, but anyway, I'd like to thank you, Minister, and thank all your assistants.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have 2 questions, Minister. In your remarks earlier, you mentioned about marine protected areas. Is DFO on track with implementing the promised number of MPAs to their 2012 commitment? And my second question is going back to the halibut allocation between the commercial and the sport fishers, and you gave some background that was very helpful. I'm just wondering if you could provide specifics in terms of at the table as what's being done to resolve the issue between the 2 sectors and get to a more fair process and a fair allocation of halibut.
Okay, well, on the MPAs, we're working very hard. MPAs, establishing one is a long process because there's so much consultation, because there's so many stakeholders in our oceans, and we have to make sure that the concerns of all are addressed. We're doing all we can, working very closely with all those stakeholders to establish more. So we're on track to 2012. I'm going to ask the deputy too. She probably has more specifics on the halibut issue if you want to elaborate.
Thanks, Minister. I can't actually speak to the options that they're discussing because they haven't landed on any of the options yet, and they really are working hard, the people themselves that are affected by any changes in this together. And I'd rather not sort of upset the apple cart that they're working hard. First of all, they had to begin to develop a relationship, which was no easy feat because of some of the historical animosity, I guess, and some distrust, and so we're working hard at building that, but doing some real analytical work behind some potential options around, I wouldn't say a more fair sharing approach, because the sharing approach had been deemed fair at one point. It just doesn't work now. And so, or it doesn't work for some now, and it would be in everybody's best interest to find a solution that we can all live with from this point on.
Thank you. Mr. Weston.
Merci bien, Mr. Weston.
Thank you very much. Minister, we welcome you here today, and we thank you for coming.
And Minister, and you climbed quickly the ladder, familiarity with a very demanding portfolio. As you know, our committee has been focused on aquaculture recently, and you mentioned the study that we're working on. The whole area is bound by two competing concerns: economic development, and you referred to that, and environmental sustainability, and our government's commitment to that has been already alluded to by Ms. Murray in terms of the upholding of the environmental assessment in the TSECO file. I wonder, given that this is something of concern particularly to British Columbians, if you could elaborate. You have said that there is interest in closed containment, and I would say that our committee members are united in interest in that. Can you tell us a little more about what the government's doing to explore closed containment as an option?
Okay, well, we have completed a couple of studies on closed containment, and I know the results of one of them can be found on our website. We have also, under the AMAP program, funded several research projects on closed containment. And what we're finding is that technically closed containment can be done, and it does exist in many areas in smaller scale operations. So if you have a much higher value fish, it can be viable with a smaller scale operation. So I think that by continuing to invest in research, I mean, we've come a long way in the last 10 years in our research on closed containment and in research in general on aquaculture. We can make better decisions, and I believe that the industry is constantly improving.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. On behalf of the committee, I want to say thank you for taking the time this morning to appear before us and answer many of our questions here today. I know you have other engagements here, and we're going to take a short recess while the Minister departs. The staff will be with us for the remainder of the meeting to answer any further questions. Thank you. We'll take a short break. I'll ask committee members to please take their seats so we can resume. We're going to go back to an original round of questioning. Ms. Dansereau, I'd like to thank you and the other officials for taking the time today to appear with us and staying for the remainder of the meeting. And hopefully we can get committee members under control here rather quickly, and we'll begin with further questioning. I believe, Ms. Murray, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, thanks for being here to answer other questions. I have, this is a question about the Cohen Commission, and appreciate that the department and the minister set that up to inquire into the decline in the salmon. Everyone was, of course, delighted at the one-year unexpected increase in sockeye salmon. There's theories about how that might be a one-time event. Trends are very worrisome in general, particularly with the southern stocks. But the question I have is, are you satisfied that this inquiry is going to achieve your objectives? I mean, what are your objectives for the inquiry? Does it look like it's on track? The avalanche of legal documents is of concern to people. The focus on the department is a concern. The absence of, or the relative absence of testimony from scientists and participants in various fisheries and communities and so on is a concern. So is there something that needs to be done to refocus the Cohen Commission in your view, or do you view it to be on track to meeting the objectives, and what were your objectives?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, the department did not set up the Cohen inquiry. It was a decision of the Government of Canada and the Prime Minister to establish and to have Justice Cohen lead the inquiry into this very important issue. So it's not a question of whether or not we are satisfied that it's achieving its objectives, because we didn't establish the objectives. As to whether or not it is, I am actually, I'm on record as saying, and I have said many times, pleased that with the work that it is doing, that it has been charged with doing, because as everybody knows, managing the salmon fishery on the west coast of British Columbia is complex. The science is complex. There are many points of view, and so to have a year and a half or 2 years of specific focus on that question, it can only be of assistance to everybody that has an interest in this fishery. So I have no views on how it is conducting itself. I know that they have a series of scientists being called into the future, and I think that the list of people that will be testifying is either on their website now or will be. So it is up to Justice Cohen to continue to do his work and the work of the Commission, and we have testified. Many of us have been called to testify, and will continue to do so.
Okay, thank you. So you have no concerns about this process, it sounds like. Do you have concerns about the adequacy of science with respect to sockeye salmon? Is it adequately funded, adequately focused? Do we have the answers that science should be able to provide us?
I believe, certainly I believe that we have been funding it adequately thus far. I know that, having once way back in my life been a scientist, I know that there's no end of work that science can do if there's more money. So there can always be further questions to be addressed. I believe that having a commission such as the Cohen Commission with a single focus on that one run, or that one species, not that one run, that one species, will add to the scientific knowledge that we have, and will bring out more science. As the Minister said, through our science investments, we leverage other science with universities and our partnerships, etc., and we will continue to do that. So I suspect that according to some, there would never be enough money. There will never be enough science. But I do believe that what we have so far has been adequate.
Okay, well, that's certainly not a view that I often hear. And if your view is we have enough science and so we have enough information, then surely we must know why our stocks have been declining so terribly over such a long period. And so presumably the department is, I mean, somebody's just not doing the right thing. If we know what the problem is, we should know what to be doing about it. So I hope for future generations' sake that you're right, but I don't agree. So I'm going to turn the rest of my time over to my colleague.
Clarify, Mr. Chair. I didn't say that we have all the answers. I certainly didn't, and I don't think any scientist would say that if we had the money, we would have the answer. So do we know what the actual problem is? No, I don't think so. Would necessarily having more money today allow us to even find that answer? I'm not sure we would. So science moves in increments, and science builds on itself. And one day we will understand the dynamics better. We understand them more now than we did 50 years ago, and in 50 years from now we'll understand it more. So I'm not sure that a large infusion of money at any one time will give you the specific answer if you don't actually know what the questions are. So people are working very hard in very many areas around the world to address that very question, and so we will continue to do so.
Andrews.
Thank you. Getting back to Area 23 and 24 crab management plan, the minister just in her testimony admitted that there was some conflict, some confusion on the particular allocation formula, and that is confirmed by departmental memos. There was a recommendation that came from your RDG, Faith Scanlon, to you, Deputy Minister, in which it recommends that it reconvene the independent panel and get a clarification on the sharing arrangement. Why wasn't that? Why wasn't the panel ever reconvened? And if there was clarification was needed, like the minister suggested this morning, why wasn't that done?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I don't remember that particular memo, but I do remember having many conversations with Faith on this issue, and it was very clear that what we were dealing with at the time was a difference of opinion, not the minister. I don't think the minister said confusion. There was certainly a difference of opinion on the interpretation of what 50-50 meant. And the department took the view, and the minister agreed, that 50-50 meant an equitable share, not an equal share for each individual, because that would not have been equitable. And so the decision that was made was done through very significant deliberation and analysis.
But why didn't the recommendation was made that you reconvene the independent panel? How come you didn't reconvene the independent panel to get clarification?
I'm sorry, I'd have to look back into what the answer was to that question. I presume, and I shouldn't presume on record, that I won't presume on record.
I'll go on to a couple other questions. The Fisheries Ambassador, Mr. Sullivan, why was his appointment only extended for 1 year?
I'm sorry, we are not in the department responsible for establishing his appointment. It's a GIC appointment.
Will you have any input onto a new Fisheries Ambassador when the time comes?
I have no idea. I would have the speculation.
Second, final question. As you're aware, there's an MOU of understanding being produced by the province and the fishing industry in Newfoundland and Labrador. The federal government is not a partner, not a player at this particular part of the process. Have you guys made any representation to this process? How are you going to see this process through, and what's your department's role when this memorandum of understanding becomes public? Because the federal government has a huge role in the fishing industry, but you're not part of this process.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. When the process began in Newfoundland, Labrador, we were not invited to be a party to the process, so much of the work had already started when we were approached. We are observers. We are clearly very much involved in some of the discussions that helped develop that MOU, but we are at this point not official partners.
You were involved with the discussions. Your officials were involved with the discussion. Who was involved with the discussions?
The officials in the regions work very closely. So the provincial officials and the federal officials and the industry talk all the time, as you know. And so we would provide advice, or we would provide information, but we are not party at this point to the MOU. And whether or not we ever will be, we don't know. We have not been formally asked.
Will you be providing a response to the MOU when it comes out? Because obviously it's going to have impact on regulation changes. And will you be responding to the MOU when it comes out? Are you disappointed that you're not involved with the process? Like, it's quite frustrating that the major player in the fishing industry is not a part of this process.
Whether or not we will respond will depend on what the MOU finally looks like. If there are elements of the MOU that can only be implemented by the federal government, obviously we will have to give consideration to what those are and make a determination as to whether or not we can respond. So it will, again, it's somewhat speculative, and we'll see what happens when the MOU is finalized.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monsieur Blais.
Merci.
Mr. Blais. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to come back quickly to the Fisheries Ambassador. Where did he go? Did he disappear into the fog? No, not at all. He's very active. He was very active with the Canadian delegation in Paris for discussions on ICAT. He's been traveling all over. He's been very active internationally on many files. I don't have the list before me now. I didn't know I was going to be asked the question, but he is very busy. How long has he been appointed for? Well, it was for 1 year. I think until the spring. I don't remember the exact dates. Now, on a very specific issue. It's a specific harbor in Carleton-sur-Mer. I've heard you speak a few times. And recently I tabled a petition in the House signed by several thousands of people from that Gaspésie area. And when so many people sign a petition, I think it reflects the interest in this and the importance of the issue. Now, the answer from the department that I received is somewhat confusing. In their answer, they say that given the various usages of this harbor, DFO is collaborating with Transport Canada in order to identify alternatives, future viable alternatives for all the port infrastructure in Carleton. Now, this is the point here that I need you to clarify. It says that it will do that in the mutual respect of our respective mandates. Now, when I read that, what I understand is this. It's as if DFO might take over the harbor completely, and that discussion between the two, within the discussions between those two departments. And it's as if those respective mandates have been forgotten about, because Transport Canada is responsible for one part and DFO is responsible for the other part. So how have if I understood this correctly, or would you interpret it differently? Well, I can only speak in general terms, not specifically. It's very clear that we each have our own mandate. And obviously we have to respect each other's mandates. And if we were going to share the work, there's the issue of accountability. So who's responsible for what? Who's responsible for safety in the harbor? Usually we would do our best to work together in order to best serve our clients. I think what I need to do is do some further research. I do apologize. We thought we were coming to speak about agriculture and a couple of other things. So it's my fault completely. I should have been better informed about this because I truly don't remember much about it. Well, it's never your fault, but it's always part of your responsibilities. However, I look forward to receiving your response on this quite quickly, I hope. So I truly need details on the response to this petition. Now, I know that you attended Mr. Daniel Pauly's conference. This was very interesting. It was very early in the morning. There were some members of the committee actually who were at Mr. Pauly's presentation. And it was really food for thought for us. Mr. Pauly said that if we continue in the same direction, we're going to hit a wall. And it's going to hurt. It's already hurting with respect to our resources. Did this trigger any feeling of urgency on your part? Well, thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I couldn't stay for the full discussion and presentation. I did hear part of it, though. And I had an opportunity to meet, actually, with Mr. Pauly and the whole team from British Columbia about a month ago. So he's a researcher at the Fisheries Centre there, and I think their work is very interesting. And I've asked that around our management table we work with this Fisheries Centre. I think it's very important that we be made aware of the various scientific perspectives out there. We know that each researcher has their own clear point of view, and our work actually is to listen to the scientists, listen to our own scientists, and listen to other scientists together. It didn't necessarily trigger a sense of urgency because I've always been concerned about the importance of the decisions we have to make, so it's always there in the back of my mind. And worldwide, fisheries management is a very, very important issue, and we're doing our best to bring the most scientists together. Well, sorry for interrupting you, because time is going by quickly, but if we're looking at the global fisheries, there's always that sword of Damocles sword above our head, and there are many people who are concerned. And here's the question. What's going to happen with these famous subsidies, in quotation marks, to harbors? Subsidies to employment, even employment insurance, and assistance for vessels and the modernization of vessels. Because these can be perceived as prohibited subsidies on a world scale, a global scale, and this threatens the future of fisheries, because if we remove subsidies, then what do we do? Fishers are going to be alone. Fisheries is going to be isolated. Are you concerned about that? Well, I understand that these negotiations are ongoing. Now, I'm not an expert on all of these negotiations. It would be a good idea to bring in someone from Foreign Affairs to discuss this. I believe you're referring to the Doha round, and I think there's very little discussion on those specific issues right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The minister referenced in her remarks in terms of lighthouses and staffed lighthouses that essentially they're waiting for the Senate committee's work to conclude on this. And is that essentially the department's view that once this work is concluded and there's, I'm assuming, a recommendation or series of recommendations that action will be taken at that point, or no action will be taken? Can you just clarify what's the work plan here?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The normal procedure is that the committee is, as your committee does, the Senate committee is looking at the question. We'll be providing a report. We will then be in the position of responding to the report as we would with any standing committee report, and we will see what they come up with, what they find out.
Okay. In terms of the going back to the Fisheries Act for a second, and again the minister referenced a new act coming at some point. She mentioned, I believe, being based on previous acts, and the consultation around those, I think, two previous acts. Both of those were not successful at being implemented. So I'm wondering if they weren't successful, and there's been no new consultation. Is this act a different act? Will it contain anything different than what was previously submitted? And if it is a new act, and if there are new elements to it, Did that receive as wide a consultation process as the previous act did? And I'll just add that from what I understand, when there was consultation, the stakeholders were not happy with that act. So I'm a little confused as to why the act, if it's going to be unchanged, is coming back, is being reintroduced, and why there's an expectation, as the Minister asked a number of us if we would support it. I can't see why we would support something that's unchanged and wasn't successful in the past. Why it would be successful now?
If I was not in the department at the time, but my understanding is that the previous introductions of the act itself died on the order paper rather than it was never defeated and it was never debated. So the consultation that went into certainly the last version of it would be deemed to be, if that was to be reintroduced, would be deemed to be the consultation required at least to get it to the first stages. That's not to say that there wouldn't be additional consultation once it's in the public. So it's really not that the acts were not sufficient or the consultation was not sufficient. It's just that the House schedule being what it was, the act did not make its way through the system.
Well, I can say from our party's perspective that it was not going to receive support because of the concerns from many of the stakeholders across the country. So can you clarify that the new act is going to be the same, or is it going to be changed?
I can't clarify that at the moment, but I can say that there would be, if there was an introduction, room for consultation.
Okay, and moving to MPAs, and again, the Minister mentioned in her remarks that it is a long process to establish a marine protected area, which I fully appreciate, and that was getting to my question, is fulfilling the 2012 commitment, and it seems that the government is far behind on in terms of achieving that full commitment, given the length of a process that it takes to achieve sign-off for an MPA. And I'm wondering if you can clarify how it is you feel the department is on track, given that we're not even halfway to our commitment.
A very significant portion of the work, Mr. Chair, is on developing the areas of interest. So, as you know, there are 2 rounds of consultation. One is in establishing areas of interest from which we can select a marine protected area. There's consultation at both those stages, and significant progress has been made on quite a number of areas of interest. So the final stages for those will be much more quickly done. So I'm fairly confident. I can't say I'm 100% confident, but I am fairly confident that we will be able to meet our targets.
Okay, and finally on, or even finally, there it is.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Mr. Cannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Just wanted to quickly ask, or start off with the Justice Cohen inquiry, the timeline. What's your understanding? Is it on schedule, and what's the anticipated final report date?
Depends on the definition of schedule. As I think everyone knows, the Commissioner Cohen asked for an extension of time for his interim report, which was due out in August, according to the first terms of reference, and he asked and received permission to extend that to October, which he did, and came out on time for that one. There you go. So I don't know. It's between the Commission and others as to whether or not there would be an extension to the second phase, and I don't know if he's asked, and I don't know if it would be granted if he was asked.
Just thank you. Going back to the issue of lighthouses, as we know, safety is paramount, as Minister Shea alluded to, and all of us around the room coming from the interior British Columbia. It's not a big issue in my constituency, but it is an issue for the economics of our province and our country from coast to coast and flying over with the committee a few weeks ago, having the opportunity to see firsthand some of the challenges to traverse through with the topography, etc. I can see the importance in talking with Brenda was a helicopter pilot example, using the lighthouse for not just as a transportation from a visual perspective, but also for the audio element. So I'm just wondering from your staff's perspective, if you look into all those aspects, not only from the safety, but also for future, and looking from an economic perspective, we're hearing from the coastal communities, is if there's an oil spill, for example, that takes human resources to be able to respond quickly. So that would possibly be able to, a role they would play. But it would come into a bigger picture. What we heard from some of the witnesses and when we visited the aquaculture sites, it concerns me that the amount of dollars that are being funneled from our friends from the south, some of the different foundations and Americans are funding these organizations under the guise of environmental protection. But yes, what did I see it is stymieing economic opportunities. And I just would like to know from your perspective, if you look at the lighthouse issue from an economic perspective as well as a safety perspective.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. The issue of other, if I can call it that, other activities that a lighthouse keeper might do rather than just the lighthouse itself, because there's a distinction between the purpose of the light and it's certainly a distinction in the minds of some of the purpose of the light versus the purpose of the lighthouse keeper. As the Minister said, there's never been any discussion of reduction in the number of lights or safety to mariners. The question of what other activities the lighthouse keepers may do is precisely the question that the Minister put to ask the Senate committee to look at. And that's what they are investigating at the moment. So I don't know the answer. I'm not sure the answer, if this is answering your question regarding whether or not we consider economic development as part of our thinking. But it would not be something that we would consider. It's not our mandate that's not what we're funded for. But we are interested in knowing there was such a general outcry of concern around the other activities that a lighthouse keeper may engage in, that it was important for us to determine what those are, and if they are important functions, where should they be housed? Is it necessary that they be with us and with lighthouse keepers, or could they be somewhere else?
Okay, thank you. With regard to aquaculture, we had a tour of experimental closed containment in Mid-Bay. It's been underway for a number of years. Hope to have the fish and the water this spring up and running, and as a viable, hopefully, test site. And I just was wondering, from the department's perspective, if that's the one that you're looking at as a modeling and procedurally for economic viability, and supplemental on the December 18th implementation as the federal jurisdiction now, as the BC Supreme Court has ruled, we're taking over the responsibility. What's the application process for new aquaculture licenses? Are we entertaining new applications, or are they on hold?
I'll answer, if you don't mind, the last part of the question first. As you know, the province will continue to play a significant role in new licenses because they have to lease the Crown land below the water. So that would always be the first step in an application, because if they can't get a lease for that, then we wouldn't engage in the conversation. So are we ready to accept a whole series of new applications? We haven't heard of many. People have not been approaching us on them. We will definitely be ready to take on our responsibilities for managing what's there and for analyzing any new applications that come in. I'll ask Kevin to address the question of which sites have been considered in the closed containment work. I'm not sure if the one you mentioned was one that we actually looked at. I'm not sure Kevin would know either, but I'll...
No, my understanding is we're aware of all of the ones that are taking place. We're following it very closely. There's been a number of meetings that we've chaired and that we've participated in with stakeholders on closed containment. We're contributing financially to some of the demonstration project and some of the research on closed containment. So I'm not certain about that specific one. I do know that we know about virtually all of them that are taking place. So financial contributions to projects. The Minister mentioned as well the research that we've done. We had an expert process on technical feasibility about a year ago. We pulled all the stakeholders together. We've also recently released a financial analysis around economic feasibility, which speaks to some of the financial challenges on closed containment. So we're involved in all parts of the file and following it very closely.
Well, I know the individuals involved were very appreciative of the federal government's support and sustainable development technology credit that have been applied to date. So we'll watch that with great interest. Kevin, while I have your attention at the moment, the issue we also studying with aquaculture is the issue of sea lice. And when we went to visit with the Washington Fisheries Department, we talked about slice. And when we had your colleague here earlier this year, we talked about slice and saying the Americans use it down in Washington, and the Washington officials said they don't use the slice. So I'm just wondering if you're familiar with the contradiction, or if you had a chance to look into what's the difference of trains of thought here.
A couple of things I'd say with respect to that. One is that we recently became aware that you had heard that, and we are trying to check that out to see what does in fact happen in Washington State and whether they simply don't use it or it's not allowed to use it. But our understanding is that it is, but we are checking that out since we heard that you did hear that. Second thing I would say is what happens in Canada, it is subject to a process led by PMRA. They do an environmental risk assessment. They do and they check out what against our standards, and they approve only products and processes that we believe, according to our standards, are acceptable. But we are checking out what we heard about Washington State.
It was very interesting. I found that the issue didn't seem to be as severe as some of the environmentalists made it out to be, but it wasn't quite as good as the industry made it to be. So somewhere in the middle is always the balanced approach. So I appreciate that information as it comes forth as well. And the last question has to do with coastal safety as well. It was brought to my attention by a few of my colleagues from the coastal communities that the coastal Search and Rescue is looking at changing their fleet. I guess in Campbell River and Prince Rupert, there's two 71-foot search and rescue vehicles or ships, and they're looking at going to there's a tender for a 47-foot fleet to replace it. And the issue is one size doesn't fit all, and I was just wondering if that's a done deal, or if they're still open for negotiations for looking at keeping the 71-foot fleet in place.
All of the analysis shows that the 47-foot is a much better suited, a vehicle that's much better suited to the conditions. It's much more agile, much more, we could have the Coast Guard here to answer this in more detail, but it is truly a better craft for the areas that it's in. I mean, if they can actually do an Eskimo roll, it's much better suited for the waters that it would be functioning in.
I'm not an expert in it, but what I've been I know there's individuals in the audience that live on the West Coast and live and breathe this, and they'll say it's only got about a 1 hour. You can go out for a day, I should say, with your fuel supply. You got to turn around. It's limited for the different weather conditions. So I think they need to have a second look and consult with the people that live and breathe on the marine on the West Coast. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I may, I can offer that we can certainly provide a technical briefing on those for you.
Thank you. We'll move to a 2-minute round. Ms. Murray?
2 minutes.
Two
Okay,
minutes.
thank you. Well, first, I'd just like to request Ms. Dansereau written substantiation to the committee of your claim that the funding support for healthy and productive aquatic ecosystems has been maintained, whereas your documents say that that funding was 50% higher than it in 2008-9 than in 2009-10. So if you could do that analysis to support your contention. Secondly, with respect to aquaculture and wild salmon, we heard clearly in Washington. I appreciate Ron for bringing this Washington trip back to memory. When we asked why they were not really doing much in the way of aquaculture, salmon aquaculture, their answer was because their focus was on restoring the wild salmon stocks, and those two things were not consistent with each other. And when I read the minister's remarks, it is all about the industrial aquaculture, and it's all about government's job is to create conditions for industry to thrive, etc. Well, yes, but in my view, that is conditional on the health and strength and restoration of the wild fisheries, and we just don't hear. We don't hear that being a priority. I don't see that being a priority. It's barely nodded to in here. And having been a minister at a time when the province, some members in the province were hiding behind the federal DFO's research and absence thereof for year after year after year, that was impeding decisions around the wild fishery and salmon aquaculture. The research was absolutely not adequate. There was not enough being done, was not reaching conclusions. And I don't see anything different in the department's approach or the minister's approach today. So, I mean, can you assure us that wild salmon fish stocks are a priority? I mean, how can you demonstrate that given the minister's comments and lack of funding increases to support that science and wild salmon stock recovery?
If I may, Mr. Chair, and I'll answer quickly. For the department and for the minister, the wild salmon fishery and all of the wild fisheries are of paramount importance. There's never been a reduction in our sense of priority around those fisheries, even whether they be recreational or it's the stocks themselves that we are equally interested in. The minister's speaking points were addressing the issue of aquaculture itself. But she is equally concerned with the wild stocks and will continue to do so. So everything we are trying to do by taking over, through the taking over of some of the responsibilities for aquaculture will be to better integrate the science on both sides and to better integrate the management on both sides to make sure that there's a true linkage between what is happening on the farming side and what is happening on the wild side. So it is an absolute fundamental priority of the department and of the minister to make sure that the two can coexist.
Thank you. Monsieur Levesque.
Mr. Levesque, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think he's really trying to send me off to the Justice Committee here with these rules. Anyway, Ms. Dansereau, I'd like to come back to the grey seal. The minister said we're still looking at the research and we don't know how many years this will last. So could we not have some sort of transitional measures then until the science has been done? So at least to stabilize the grey seal population and stop it from growing. I mean, they've gotten as far as Abitibi, or they will get as far as Abitibi if it carries on like this. Now, I have another question on aquaculture. We know what happened in British Columbia. Could the same thing happen in Quebec? Can I just ask a question? What do you mean when you say the same thing? When we're talking about the transfer of responsibilities. Well, with respect to the grey seal, you did hear the minister. It is a priority. We're continuing to work on this, and we've even established a scientific symposium. Scientists from all over came to discuss this issue and to talk about the impact on biodiversity. And the report from that symposium, I believe, will come out soon. Several researchers are involved, and there's ongoing debate between them. We want to make sure they come up with the right answers. Now, with respect to aquaculture, our intent is not necessarily to expand our responsibilities. What happened in British Columbia was the result of a court decision. There are no other cases before the court. We think that the sharing amongst jurisdictions is well done, and this was one of the issues in British Columbia. That is, whether that system was well-founded. The court said that no. And so we changed that. But the same isn't necessarily happening in Quebec or anywhere else. We're very comfortable with the system that exists, and I believe that Quebec is comfortable with its sharing of jurisdiction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Minister referenced in her remarks about the 2010 Fraser River sockeye return and the abundance that happened. The one thing that she didn't talk about, and I know we have in the 2009 run was a complete collapse. It was predicted that there would be over 10 million returning and around 1 million return, so it was a 90% reduction and essentially a collapse. And we have the Cohen inquiry studying that issue and hopefully determining some recommendations forward to avoid that in future. But then we turn around in 2010 and have a quite a spectacular return. Yet the department still predicted about 10-11 million would return, and there was almost 30 million. I mean, it was at one time said over 30 million, and I think it was then adjusted to under 30 million. Essentially, there doesn't seem to be any idea, from the department of what kind of returns are coming back in those 2 years alone. We just look at 2009, and the prediction was 10-11 million. We look at 2010, the prediction was 10-11 million, roughly in that area. Both are wildly off. How is it that the department is able to say with any degree of confidence that that you're on top of this situation and saying that the wild fishery is being managed well, you're confident of the returns and the management systems that are in place?
Thank you for the question. And it's one that the Cohen inquiry is looking at, and so I will not try and guess where they will go with this. But it would be the scientists themselves are the first to say that what they can do is provide, based on certain facts that they have, a range. And they're never comfortable in giving a pinpoint estimate, but they're often pushed into saying, well, given all of this, what's a pinpoint estimate? And that's when we are generally wrong. But the range tends to be the one where we are generally correct. We tend to fall within the range, but it's a broad range, and it's not a range that people find very interesting because it's too big. But it is based on the science as we know it, and it's based on us recognizing that we don't necessarily know what happens out at where they go when they go out to the depths of the ocean. So we can predict what happens based on what goes out and the conditions on when they're coming back in, but not on what happens when they're in the ocean.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Your time's expired. Mr. Weston.
Firstly, in your considerations of aquaculture, Madame Donsero, please don't forget Agri-Marine has a very lively operation in China. So in terms of the impact on Canadian jobs and the technology that is being demonstrated there, I hope that you will take that into account. Secondly, in terms of super tankers on the West Coast, I understand there's some 3,000 a year on the West Coast, 6 times that amount on the East Coast. It's an issue concerns British Columbians and all Canadians. There is a process called the Pacific North Coast Integrated Management Area process. And I ask you this, if this isn't a DFO responsibility, and I understand DFO is not funding it, then don't we expose ourselves to the possibility that interests of U.S.-based interests could be funding that process, U.S.-based interests that have an interest in stopping tankers going off our west coast because of the advantage that will be gained by Americans if all the supertanker process is there instead of Canada?
Thank you for the question. And I'm not one to use acronyms, but in this case I do. You're talking about PENSEMA. I actually know this process more by its acronym, which is rare for me. The PENSEMA process is an ongoing process. It's not a decision-making process. It's really an information-sharing process. And it will not play the role of deciding whether or not tankers make their way through. There's a regulatory system in place, and those particular questions are strictly in the purview of Transport Canada and that minister. So I would not be nervous that the PENSEMA process would result in those kinds of prescriptive decisions.
But we're hearing that Tides Canada, funded by potentially U.S. interests, will that not influence Canadian decision makers?
My understanding is that there's some funding for participation in various meetings, and the approval of some of the projects is done by consensus of a broad range of stakeholders. So it's run much more by stakeholders, which includes all of our partners and client groups.
Thank you. Ms. Dansborough, on behalf of the committee, I'd like to say thank you to you and the other officials for appearing here this morning and answering our many questions and the wide range of questions. Thank you once again. This meeting stands adjourned.